So yesterday, the CIA director flew unannounced to Moscow, and the last time this happened was in late 2021 to warn Putin that we knew he was about to invade Ukraine in the hopes that he would back off. Now, no doubt something important is going on behind the scenes, but as of right now, it's all speculation. So today we're going to take a look at what we do know so far, as well as some assessments from the Russian and the American side. Now, personally, I think Russia is in the process and is planning to continue testing NATO to see if Article 5 will actually hold. And what we saw play out yesterday was the United States letting Russia know that we know what they're up to and trying to talk them off that ledge. Now, I do want to stress that the official U.S. stance right now is that this was nothing. President Trump just a few hours ago said, "I hate to disappoint people. This was a pretty semi-routine visit," talking about how it was just focused on bringing the war in Ukraine to an end, which I don't believe. And the reason for that is this is an unannounced CIA visit at the highest level in a military transport with no additional information before, during, or after. They didn't meet with Putin. They didn't meet with negotiators. It was intelligence head to intelligence head. That is very rare for it to take place, especially to take place in Moscow. So yeah, something is up here. Now, the New York Times, in reporting on this for some details, said a military C-17 cargo plane had flown from Andrews Air Force Base near Washington, D.C., and landed in Moscow after a stop in Riga, the capital of Latvia. That was followed by reports of a motorcade with diplomatic plates in the Russian capital. And on the Russian side, Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, did stress that there were no direct contacts. This was not a meeting between Putin and Ratcliffe. It was exclusively with the intelligence services. The Wall Street Journal, talking about this, said the U.S. has collected intelligence showing Russia's early preparations for a possible military mobilization in Ukraine and plans for testing the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's resolve. Now, that was picked up as this is exactly why the meeting took place, and there's no evidence to support that. This is speculation. All right. I think these are things that we know. We know Russia is in the process right now of rolling out a mobilization this fall. We still have yet to see what it will actually look like. We have some Russian assessments here in a minute that think that might be the reason for this visit. The other one that I'm in this camp, personal opinion, this is about testing NATO, trying to see if Article 5 is still going to hold. But again, the Wall Street Journal is saying this is what it could be. They don't have sources saying that's what it is. They did quote Beth Sanner, a former U.S. Deputy Director of National Intelligence, that said, quote, "It could be to say, we know what you're thinking about doing, and you better not." It also could be about the Iran ceasefire and putting someone else into that discussion. She added that Ratcliffe might also touch upon the Kremlin's support for Iran following a new U.S. sanctions campaign against the regime. In fact, there's already been some reporting on that from what I would refer to as a less than reliable source. I'm going to bring it up here just because of the amount of traction that it's gotten so far. I know it's a dangerous game playing whack-a-mole with what I think to not be true, but given that this assessment is like 3 million views over on X in the first 12 hours, and I'm already seeing it repeated by people that I put some trust in, I feel like it's at least worth addressing. This is the Hormuz letter. It's an account based in Europe. Don't know anything beyond that. They said that Russian officials have briefed Iran that the CIA director's visit was to deliver a message asking Moscow to press Iran into reopening the Strait of Hormuz, warning that Russian entities would otherwise face designations under Operation Economic Outcast. Russia declined and told Iran the threatened measures were of limited consequence, according to 2 senior Iranian sources with knowledge of the briefing. Look, that type of thing very well might be happening. I mean, it fits with other current events. That's not a intel head to intel head type discussion. It just isn't. But again, we're seeing this pick up a lot of steam right now because it is showing the United States kind of on our knees, begging Russia to please help us with the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think that that's a reason. That's generally not a reason that we would see the CIA director travel secretly, but still known, which is kind of an interesting aspect here. It was not announced and it was not advertised during, before, or after, but they still flew on a plane that was known to flight trackers. So people knew that there was a VIP moving. It was just kind of under the surface of who it actually was. That's not the type of thing you do to negotiate the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Honestly, there's a lot of other people that can carry on that conversation. Now, turning to the Russian assessment, Chris Owicki over on X, I think, did a great job rolling together some Russian mill bloggers. We'll have all of these in the description below. The first one he looked at was Dmitriev, who essentially said this is probably the same as what it was in 2021, where the United States came over to warn us and say, we know what's happening and give us a little bit of a heads up, us, the Russians, in that sense. So he said there are only 2 scenarios that that Ratcliffe would have traveled to Moscow. The first is nuclear. as in the use of nuclear weapons is on the table. The second is to stop the fighting in Ukraine. He stressed that Russia has the advantage right now. Ukraine is running low on manpower, is running low on interceptors, and the way he presented it is Russia is getting ready to mobilize. And with that manpower, they have the opportunity to really push the front back for the first time in a long time. So this was Ratcliffe stepping in and saying, please don't, because he sees that Ukraine is about to fall. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but either way, that's one of the Russian assessments. The other one here is from Dmitriev, is thinking that Ratcliffe was showing up to tell him how the United States would respond in the event of a further test or even an attack on a NATO ally. And we're going to get into this here in a minute, but there's been a handful of items so far that arguably could be referred to as an attack against NATO, and it would not be a stretch if a country wanted to invoke Article 5 to discuss these at the very least. Dmitriev thinks that Ratcliffe might be showing up very similar to 2021, where we said, we know you're getting ready to go in. You should not, and you should know that we are going to provide Ukraine with weapons, which is believed to be the conversation that happened back in, I believe it was November 2021. That's Dmitriev. Another one here, Yuri Banachek, says Ratcliffe could be useful to Trump in two opposite scenarios. The first is a warning to Moscow. If Russia is not ready to soften its conditions for ending the war, the United States may expand support for Kyiv, primarily in the areas of intelligence and long-range strikes. The second is negotiation. If Moscow is ready to make certain concessions, limiting American intelligence support for Ukraine could be part of a deal. There's a third option, a broader discussion about the risk of direct confrontation between Russia and NATO. Those first few things have been very open, very publicly discussed. So I'm hard-pressed to believe, again, that the CIA director travels secretly to Moscow to talk about conditions for ending the war and what we may or may not do in terms of ramping up or removing support for Ukraine. Those are conversations that we have heard the vice president have in public. We have seen those conversations with the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Army when he went to Ukraine to talk, and certainly Witkoff and Kushner. It would be unusual, I think, for that to all of a sudden fall on the CIA director. Two Majors, another Russian mill blogger, actually took this a totally different direction. He said the number and quality of Ukraine's drones received by the EU can actually replace a series of nuclear strikes in terms of damage, which would trigger the provisions of the Russian Federation's nuclear deterrence doctrine. So he says that's why the United States is going over there saying, Russia, stop. Ease up. We're paying attention. Please don't overreact, or according to Two Majors, react appropriately by using a nuclear response to these Ukrainian drone strikes. So again, we've got President Trump saying it's nothing. When you run through some of the scenarios of what it could be, I feel like it's something pretty significant here. In fact, what I land on personally is David over at Malcontent News. Great source, by the way. I'm going to link all of their channels in the description below. They're just awesome and very, very consistent and detailed in the assessments they put out. But he just kind of consolidated what I was thinking and put it in better words than I could. It's about testing NATO. And we've seen Russia trying to do this for some time, and they may view an opening. Malcontent News said, quote, to a Western observer, Russia conducting a limited military engagement against a NATO nation seems not only impossible, but a terrible decision. But within Putin's inner circle, Russia is not only winning the Russia-Ukraine war, but Ukraine will be defeated by the end of the year. The United States is weak, NATO is divided, and Russia has a date with destiny. It is possible the Kremlin views that the time has come to test NATO resolve. He said, additionally, Russia could be reaching the conclusion that a brief military engagement into NATO territory will have minimal consequences. NATO troops won't enter Russian territory, while support for Ukraine could be dissolved, driven by Europe's urgent need to defend against a Russian provocation. That's one of those things that sounds crazy and realistic at the same time. There is no scenario where Russia would want to take on NATO right now in a conventional war. That would not go well for Russia, not by a long shot. Russia knows that, or at least most of the planners inside of Russia know that. They wouldn't be trying to initiate a full-scale war with NATO. They are trying to make sure, or trying to get a full understanding of what does an Article 5 response actually look like. Is the alliance fractured? And this is something we've talked about on this channel repeatedly. Anytime we throw just a little cold water on the idea that we would or wouldn't stand with our NATO partners, it just opens the door for Putin to want to test that out. Why wouldn't he? All right. And he's already started doing that. In just recent weeks, we had countless drones that have flown into NATO territory. But again, all of this cited here in the Malcontent News piece. They talk about Germany finding a third military-grade drone at the Leipzig-Halle airport. This is a critical NATO logistics base, and they're just putting together this report saying we're working on who's responsible here, but 3 military-grade drones at an airport. It looks like a detonator failed on one of them, where there were 4 Ukrainian AN-124 transports stationed, and a significant amount of NATO aid to Ukraine flows through that airport. Like, it's not explosive-laden drones, all right? These weren't like commercial drones being flown around to take pictures and recon. They had explosive charges, right? That's what we're starting to see more and more likely from Russia. We had a Russian KH-101 cruise missile that entered Polish airspace back on July 29th. It sounds like more and more the evidence supports that that was intended to strike in Poland. Again, according to Malcontent News, they said privately, Polish officials believe the incident was meant to test NATO's air defenses. Yes. All right. They've got an excuse to do that. It's not just a matter of can NATO detect and shoot these weapon systems down? Can they identify the Russian drones? Can they shoot down the Russian missiles? It's what does that response actually look like? I mean, we're also seeing Russian drones repeatedly violating Romanian airspace and territorial waters. This has ramped up in recent days. Every one of these, and it's like a toddler in a sense, right? Kind of poking and always prodding, or maybe just a kid trying to find out where that line is. And all of these little things, like we are not going to start World War III because a drone flew off track and accidentally landed in a field and didn't hurt anybody in Poland. That's a ridiculous reason for nuclear weapons to launch. I think we can all agree on that. But what if it's just a little bit more, and then just a little bit more? And what if it's a sabotage operation that Russia maybe wanted to have happen, but technically it wasn't a Russian citizen. It was somebody that maybe through a few connections was paid by. You see how you just go down this path where Russia can keep poking in this hybrid warfare sense, but I would argue that missiles flying into NATO territory, that drones flying into NATO territory, that kamikaze-style one-way attack drones at a NATO airport, we've crossed that line. Now, I don't know that the response, and I've talked about what I believe the response should be. It should be stacking up a heavy air defense presence, kind of a no-fly zone in western Ukraine, have their permission, and stand it up along NATO's eastern flank, and just make sure for Russia's sake, honestly, is a big part of this, that nothing gets through and no accidents are made. But either way, my view on all of this is that Russia is testing Ukraine, or is testing NATO. They're going to continue testing NATO, and they may have had something in the works that would have ramped this up to a 9 or a 10, which is why the CIA director flew over quietly, unannounced, yesterday, had his conversation with their Russian counterpart saying, we know what you're up to. We know what you're thinking about doing. Don't. Or if you do this, just be ready. We see that it's coming. Of course, we'll see if there's any information on this is ever made public. Very well may be classified for years and years on end. Now, as a quick fundraiser update, we just delivered the 25th vehicle through our campaign for Cars for Ukraine. I'll put up some pictures here of that van. It's actually heading out to the 2nd Battalion Seraphims, a new drone unit in the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade. This campaign is going on all year, and we're just getting ready to kick off our fall push, so kind of a sub-campaign within it. New patches coming out. Should be able to share that with you in the next week or so. In the meantime, you can check out these merch collabs we've got going on with Car for Ukraine and Ziggy's Paw. We've got shirts, sweatshirts, posters with unique designs. Actually, I'm rocking my Ziggy's Paw Built Under Fire shirt right here. So solid stuff. And 100% of the proceeds, 100% of the profits from the Car for Ukraine and Ziggy's Paw designs go directly to support those organizations. So for those interested, those links will be in the pinned comment and description below. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.